Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 103. Today's topic, let's rebuild a culture. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
And I'm not quite sure, but you might hear a loud purring and possibly screams throughout the episode for me. That would be the producer, Boo, who is purring behind me as we record.
Yeah, she's actually right over Jeff's shoulder. And Ra, who has been demoted to associate producer because she's not paying attention at all, is again on the table.
So if you hear knocking, it's probably Ra cleaning herself, which is forcing the microphones to shake. Or if you hear screaming, it is Boo falling and punishing me.
But if she does punish you, it's undoubtedly sure that you deserve it. So.
Well, as a human scum.
Yeah, underling.
Yeah, who's failed her on so many levels.
You have failed me for the last time, mortal.
Jeff, you are not my child. You disgust me. Get away from me, you fiend.
So we're going to be talking about the Sirens today. Because I don't remember a whole ton about the Sirens, give me a brief breakdown of them.
So I'll give you a brief breakdown.
And we're going to, are we recreating them from roughly scratch? Are we changing?
From roughly scratch.
Yeah, okay.
And what you'll see is, in my list of things that I use when I develop a culture, this is the way I come across my evolution side of it very quickly. There are only 3 things
that you want to maintain.
That I want to maintain.
Now, before we even get down to the breakdown of what they were, can I ask why you want to rebuild them? Are they in the book?
They're in the book, but in slurry.
Okay.
So it's like they are mentioned in the book, and they will undoubtedly be showing up at some point. Mm-hmm. And my thing is, I never really put that much thought into them. They were sort of cheap European Celt knockoffs originally, and there are certain things that I want from that.
So were they not fully developed?
Yeah, they really weren't fully developed.
Okay. So what little development they had, we're going to ignore and we're going to recreate.
Except for the 3 things.
Yeah, of course.
And to let the viewers know, it is the color blue, lunar cycles, and grammar based on Britain, the language Britain, which is actually a Celtic language. But one of the suggestions I was given when developing a language, which we will not be developing here, we'll just do overview stuff here, was that a smart person who's developing a language will find a grammar they like, and they might tweak it, but they essentially take that grammar, and that's the basis, and then you come up with the phonics and some of the grammatical rules you might switch around, like where the subject, verb, object is, and stuff like that in a sentence.
So. Okay, so what were the Sirens?
Okay, they were essentially a Celtic-style people that were largely conquered by Bedrachum people over a period of centuries. Where the world is right now, most of the mainland, the continental part of the world that they once controlled, has been sort of invaded and taken over by Bedrachum peoples. So essentially, when the Bedrachum invade into the arm of the world, the Siren people are already there.
So they're native.
So they're sort of native to the area. They really did migrate here, but like at the beginning of time,
air quotes for those of you not watching.
Well, everyone should be watching us as on iTunes in our audio podcast.
That's a dirty line there.
Well, anyone with a good enough app could actually see what I'm doing there.
And anyone who's been paying attention knows that you're a fiction writer and
I lie. And so I really want to think them out a bit more before I get too far into them and like published.
Right.
In the published realm. And so there are a few things that I find important that I want to keep. Blue, for those of you who don't know much about actual Celtic history, we're not talking about Irish, even though they're probably descendants of the Celts, maybe related at some level, linguistically definitely, but it was really a group of people who lived north of the Alps. There are very many rituals not rituals. There were very many incursions with the Romans that they had. They were known to be a fierce people. They had very good technology for building weapons. They weren't much into armor. Stories of nude Celtic warriors going into battle with blue paint all over their body, and which is real cocky.
I would imagine fearsome, but successful?
They were successful for a long time. I mean, you figure there were, I believe, the first historical accounts of Celts were actually interactions with Greeks long before the Roman Empire. So they were around for a long time. They didn't have a written language, which is something that will be solved in my world, and you'll learn why when we get a bit into their history. So we don't know much from their perspective. We know mainly what the Romans talked about them. Mm-hmm. And they were usually the enemy of Rome. They controlled northern Italy when Rome was growing up into a big boy power, and that was their first sort of conflicts with them.
Now, if they were known from being in the Alps, and I assume you're referring to the Swiss Alps.
Yes.
That's much further north than Italy. So
actually, there's 3 parts of the Alps: the German Alps, the Swiss Alps, and the Italian Alps. It's all one range.
So they were in the Italian Alps then?
Both sides. They were on both sides of the Alps. They were different tribes.
Well, yeah. My point is that these people covered a great expanse of land. Were they just like, oh, there's some here and there's some there, or were there a lot of people covering that
linguistically,
territory?
And at a basic sort of proto-cultural level, they were pretty much from the Alps area all the way up into Ireland. However, there were some interesting things with the way their paganism. You had a chief god locally, and it was not the same from town to town. So each tribe of Celts would have their own sort of chief god. And I'm not so certain because I haven't done a lot of research on their religion because, once again, it wasn't written down. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it's conjecture. I do like that idea of this idea where there's this sort of common, and there probably a lot of similar characteristics, but there's a different name, and that sort of forms a very fierce tribal loyalty, but not a loyalty to the greater, Syrian people.
So do you want that as part of the Syrian people?
Yeah, that will probably be part of it.
Okay, so tribal societies.
Very tribal, very fiercely independent of each other.
Which will be their undoing.
Yes, which is why they've lost vast, copious amounts of land at this point. And
because they're not supporting each other. It's like, oh, that's Bob's clan over there. Forget Bob's clan. Let the Bedrachim take Bob's clan.
There's one other very important piece of history to know about the Syrian. There is a great forest, loosely translated as the Evermoan Forest, which resides outside of the city of Hywall. And which is a city which in Bedrachim would be Klein Farm. And there's this giant forest, big, thick, sort of red, redwood style trees. But I mean, this forest stretches for naturally, an area size larger than Connecticut. Mm-hmm. It's a huge forest.
So like 50 miles circular, like.
Easy. Yeah.
So, well, actually, that'd be the radius, because about 20, it'd be about a 50-mile radius would cover a little more than the entire state of Connecticut.
Yeah, and I would say
we're only about 100 miles across.
It's much longer than Connecticut, and it's a little bit sort of wider than Connecticut.
Okay.
So
now, could you please convert that into clicks for our international listeners?
No, I could not. But in Bedrachim distance, it's
I believe
27 to
roughly 230 kilometers.
And Bedrachim would be 27.2 Medus, which is
Are you making that up?
I'm making that up right now. Yes.
That's good. I was going to. I'm like, you have a distance measurement system built in? No, I'm a fiction writer.
I lie. Hold on, I'm writing it down now.
Yes, yes, I do. So tribal cultures, you want to keep a small aspect of the Celt there. Do you have a history in mind?
There's a history, and I'll briefly cover the history now. And I think we get this all in one episode, But if this does go too long, we might have to cut it off and finish it in 2.
Well, that's why I do want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake. Well, not rush, but I want to make sure we don't make the same mistake that we did with our hero building episode, where we spend too much time on history and not enough time on future and intention.
Well, it's very important because...
Unless you want to make sure that the history is recorded.
I have a history for them. We're going to go over the basic history here. We don't need all of the details of it, but we need the major movement kind of pieces because that will cause changes in the culture.
And you need to make sure to keep reminding yourself of that because you will get very detailed on history, which is fine. I like it, but if your intention is to finish this in one episode, give us the briefs on the history.
Well, and this will be briefs. This will be widget-based history.
Okay. So because otherwise you can just write it all down and they can all read it in one of the following books.
So essentially, this is the way it works.
I'm going to encourage you to write a Syrian history book.
I could. First, there starts off with the Syrens who are sort of alone in this area of the world.
Okay.
Not a lot of contact with the rest of the world. It's kind of isolated part of the world with the way the world is.
Are they aware that there are other cultures out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, they definitely know there are some.
Okay. So they're not like these remote tribes like we see in South America that have never seen other mankind.
They maybe haven't seen them, but they've heard of them. There's stories of them. Mm-hmm. There's a big, thick mountain range that splits the part of the world they're in, and it's two completely different cultural areas. And so they're very distinctly apart, but these are very tough, impassable mountains. And there are some leakage of traders in between them, don't get me wrong.
Sorry, did you say tough, impassable? I thought you said tough and passable. That's not clarity. Okay, so it's really hard to get through these mountains.
Yeah, it's like individuals that sort of open it up, which are very fiercely fought over usually. But in general, outside of those, there's no major commerce going overland between the continents in this area. Overseas, there's a little bit more, but especially at this point, no one really has big trading navies. No one really has navies really to speak of. They have like boats that get around and fishing vessels, and sometimes there's cultural contact because the distance isn't that far, but it's very remote. Especially early on in the evolution of the world, talking about like, mainly at this point, still hunter-gatherers, probably some are starting to settle into villages kind of time period. Very quickly, they get their first root interruption that there is a bigger, badder world out there where a group of dwarfs sort of burrow from the inside of the world up to the surface, and they form this area called the Kingdom of the Iron Hills, which is a very undwarven-like name.
And that's sarcasm, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very non.
I've read about that on the internet.
Yeah.
So what do you mean they burrow up from the earth?
Essentially, dwarven culture, to give you a very brief synopsis, is an underground culture. That's the focus because they believe that the world is a cave, and that to get to heaven you have to find the right cave. So
they do a lot of digging.
They do a lot of digging and building along the way because it takes a long time to dig. Mm-hmm. So they'll build cities and then completely abandon them and keep moving deeper and deeper.
So they've got all these underground cities.
They have in a couple places where it's really nice and people are successful and they start losing the cultural desire to dig forever for heaven. Where there are a couple periods of time in a couple places where dwarven kingdoms will sort of sprout out onto the surface.
Mm-hmm. So that's what's occurred here.
And that's what's occurred here. So they sort of pop up, much to the chagrin, but to the Syren, the mountains are this impassable place that is bad mojo. There are other smaller mountain ranges they interact with, but the big mountains in the middle, or I guess we should probably put that as an actual belief. The mountains in the middle are bad.
Okay.
Where the big mountains are bad. And the next big shock is, and this is a little bit later as the Syren are starting to become very much a village dwelling, tribal, fiercely tribal with their own independent gods.
I mean, were they nomadic before that?
They were hunter-gatherers, and when they were starting to form down into these villages. And now we're progressing forward to history where they're a settled people. And pretty much completely. They have people who go out and hunt, but it's from a central location of their village. And they very quickly become either a fishing-based or an inland-based farming cultures. And the next big surprise are the woods. The elves in my world have this ability, this magic, not really an ability, move across ley lines, which are sort of magical paths of strong magic.
And when you say move across, what do you mean?
Like teleport.
Like teleport.
Oh, yes.
Okay, not just like I can run across it real fast. You literally poof.
Yes, literally. It's like the main way they do it ritualistically is there are some major pools of water at crossings of ley lines, and they will use these pools of water, and they will actually move things into the pools of water. They will perform the ritual, and those things will come out, and they're usually connected to other pools of water. And this is magic that will, in a not very long period of time, will be lost to the elves, and the elves will, they're the way they were. So they have these strange colonies sprouting up near these pools. The elves in my world aren't happy-go-lucky forest elves. They're very much based on Mesoamerican Indians, very bloodthirsty. They will eat your heart to gain your power if you're worthy, if you're lucky.
If you were hard to kill.
That's right.
If you're easy to kill, then I don't want that in me.
And so you have this group of very militaristic elves come through, and they have some natural advantages that make them very potent in the forest, and very quickly start colonizing up that entire forest.
That big one you were talking about before.
Yes, the big one I was talking about before.
Now, just for my own basic visual, if I'm going to draw something here and here, what am I going to draw? Am I going to draw mountains here? Am I going to draw water here?
To what purpose?
Just to understand.
You want a basic geography?
Basic geography, yeah. Unless you have a map. So, since the listeners don't have a map in front of them, basically what I'm looking at is a landmass that goes from south to north and then takes a hard 90-degree cut to the east. There's a mountain range that runs from north to south, and then when it cuts east, it also cuts east. So you've got this mountain range that literally separates both sides of the continent.
And they're really over here too, kind of this.
That's fine, but I imagine for our purposes,
all the passes are over here.
Okay, and there's some islands right at the elbow, and there's a large island at the back of the arm. And is this...
That's a forest.
Is that the forest we're talking about? Okay. So the forest we're talking about is on the west coast, basically.
And there's some other mountains right there.
And where are the settlements we're talking about?
So up here...
So up along the north side?
Here are areas where the Syrian tribes.
So you're gesturing to the entire landmass?
Not on this side of the mountain.
It's only on the north and west side of the range. Okay. Good. So
a pretty
elves, bloodthirsty dwarves popping up from anywhere in this range?
They're sort of where you see the bend of the mountain range. That's where their basis of power is.
So do you want to talk about the Syrian people as a whole, or do you want to talk about the Syrian people in this neighborhood that are going to be affected by both of these other cultures showing up?
Well, really, those cultures have repercussions because there is a lot of trade between the Syrians.
Of course, that's why I'm saying. It seems to me that would be more important.
It does elapse out, but we're kind of focused more on the proto-culture in general.
Okay.
Which is kind of centered around those islands and the area north of that forest.
Okay.
There are definitely tribes to the south of that. There are definitely tribes, but the further you get away from that area, the less population there is.
So we're really talking about the elbow of the continent.
Yes, and that's why I always call it the arm of the world.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
And that is the elbow.
Yeah, so we're at the elbow and the island's off the elbow.
Yep. And
so you want to get back up to the list and just go down that?
Yeah. Well, we're really doing shared experience because these are the major experiences that will influence them throughout time and sort of change them. And so you have the elves and the dwarfs, both as major ones.
Just about like that. You know that you can talk while I write, right?
Yes. But your handwriting's so pretty, I get sucked into it. So then the time goes on. The Syrian actually work with some elves who don't like the other elves, And actually,
are they a different type of elf or just different
it's
tribes?
The same types of elves, but it's the ones that have started to live here for a while and are further away from the homeland. And the climate's different. The desire.
They just change.
Exactly. And so these are more like the earthy, crunchy elves you might get in a token book here, are starting to form up their own culture here. But they're still controlled. They're still controlled by the actual, that center empire. The Sirens don't like the Central Empire that has sort of invaded their area slowly, because they're afraid they're going to expand beyond the forest. They actually work with some of the more friendly elves in the neighborhood, and they start a revolt against the Elvish Empire. And due to some shenanigans, which I will not get into here,
because they'll be in the book.
It might be released at some point, but this is what I consider secret lore of my world. The magic for using the water pools disappears.
Jeff White.
I can't tell you. I just said this. Stop it. So for some weird reason, the elves lose the ability to do that very quickly. The old school elves get overwhelmed by the new school elves and the Siren, which the Siren have a huge population advantage. And
so at that point, the Siren organize as a people?
No, but enough of the tribes in the area get together to support the elves, because they'd rather have the nicer elves in that area than
the crappy elves. Heart eating.
Exactly. You don't want heart eating neighbors. Cannibalism's never long.
Unless they're going to share.
Siren hearts do taste like chicken. Then things kind of settle down for centuries. There's, always little conflicts between tribes, between the dwarves, but there's somewhat of a harmony in the area. All like it's just wondrous and what could possibly go wrong.
I'm going to bet you. will go wrong.
No, it's the peoples of the world. I'm just a conduit for their bad behavior.
No. You're going to do something horrible to these people, I'm convinced.
So then, essentially, one of those passes, the one in the... actually, there's two passes that go out to the larger part of the world. And they're those two lines there. Okay. One north and one south of the middle mountain range.
Okay. So at about the wrist.
Or really the shoulder.
Well, I would say that this is the shoulder. I would say, for me, the person's laying down.
But see, the thing you're missing is the whole rest of the continent.
The more of the continent.
Spews off of that way.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, then the shoulder.
He says a really wussy bicep on the side.
I know, it is a small bicep. Because, see, that looks more like a bicep. That looks like a pretty good forearm.
Yeah, it does. You're right.
So that's why I thought that was the wrist.
That's a fair thought from my wonderful artwork.
But lacking the main body of the land mass,
Yes, you inappropriately thought it was a wrist.
I should have known when you said that there were passes there that they would have led to something.
To something, yes.
As opposed to just water. Just you can get through the mountains and it's just a cliff.
And first through the southern pass, which the Siren don't know much about because they trade some with the people and they hear rumors of this nomadic tribe moving up from the steppes called the Dracum, who start coming in and screwing with the people to the south. And they're like, well, we're not too worried. They're screwing with the people to the south.
Yeah, forget them.
Little did they realize that was not the majority of the Bedrachum. The majority of the Bedrachum were actually coming through the northern pass and bulldozing their way pretty much all the way over to the elbow within 50 years. Because not huge populations out there. The Siren are kind of like, well, that tribe sucks anyway. They don't know how to write the same way as the center tribes do, so they're idiots anyway. They couldn't possibly beat us. And then all of a sudden, a larger number of people with better weapons is at your little kingdom, and you're going, hey guys, behind me. Come on, we should fight them. Mm-hmm. And so there's a huge series of this, which is the major Siren issue is, see where there's like freckles on the arm there? Mm-hmm. That's the area it's called the Constrad's Broken Lands. And essentially...
Is the Constrads another group of people?
That's actually a name of the Bedrachum god.
Okay.
And they call that there, which will sort of show you the extent of where the Bedrachum go. But they literally, up until the point they get to those Broken Lands, pretty much due to a lot, mainly disunity and bad politics on the side of the Siren, just sort of slap them around and take all of that land The inner side.
And I assume that they're like colonizing along the way.
Oh, yeah.
So they're just like building cities, villages, and procreating and just expanding.
They hadn't thought of cities or villages much because theirs were sort of mobile. But some of the Sirens were areas like on what becomes Kleinfar, what becomes Bedrakis.
Isn't Kleinfar around here?
It's actually near the forest. The city of Bedrakis is up near the elbow.
Okay.
And that's where the Bedrakim are like, you know what? These weird permanent homes they have are kind of cool. So maybe we're going to take this, idea and start running with it. And so once they get there, that sort of becomes the home near the elbow. And then all the way to the south to those, that Broken Lands area. That is where, and I'll include a map in the show notes as well too. But up to the Broken Lands area, essentially that's where the initial expansion against the Siren go. The Sirens still control the islands, but really just got their behind smacked around pretty hard. And they're proud people, but the problem is they're fiercely independent. It's like they don't have that Greek moment of coming together against the larger foe. Where the Bedrakim are very utilitarian minded, where the Siren are not. And so they take anything good that they find and say, let's sort of manipulate this to our use now because we think it's better than what we do. And then we have other things that we do better as well, too.
So they're the Borg.
No.
Not quite.
Not quite.
But it's kind of Borg.
Not as efficient as the Borg.
Who is? But my point is
the same idea.
My point is that if they see something another culture is doing better and that's something that they like and approve of, they're going to adopt it. They're going to they're going to use it. They're like, hey, wow, you guys,
and then they'll claim it's theirs.
You guys build better foundations than we do. We're going to start building our foundations that way. As a matter of fact, we always have.
We always have built this way. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Within 10 years, it very quickly becomes into something that they've always done.
Oh yeah, my great grandfather built foundations. He invented foundations this way. Actually.
Even the foundations as the tribes were roaming through the central steppes.
Silly tribes. Anyway.
But they start forming up into kind of like duchy-style kingdoms in the area, much smaller than any centralized one, the major one being that area I showed you. But the Siren are now kind of out in the islands. At this point, they become a lot more focused on fishing. And they do some raids. The major flaw they have are crappy boats. They have, and this is probably something else will steal. They use leather boats, which are okay for fishing just off a shore and in lakes and in rivers.
Yeah, but you're not going to go across a big water mass in that.
Not consistently successfully.
Yeah.
It can happen, and there are stories where there's a thought that maybe an Irish monk made it across the North Atlantic.
Yes, but that's like
one out of how many boats
that one guy. Yeah,
that's right. They didn't have the ships of the Northmen, which made them effective raiders. But occasionally, they hated the Bedrakim for some reason because
the Northmen or the Siren.
The Siren hated them for some reason. I don't know why. And
again, sarcasm.
And so they would sometimes do raids across, but it was mainly to antagonize them and less to bring stuff back because their boats just weren't really built for that. Mm-hmm. And they wanted them to realize that we're now powerful. You can't cross the sea and screw with us, but we can cross this, sea, stab two of your people and go back.
Yeah.
And
maybe go back.
Maybe go back. Now, to the south of that, there is another Siren cultural group down there, which will eventually be conquered. Yes.
Not.
But they are heavily influenced by the people who are on the oceans and on the inside, where the rest of the Siren are not. So even at this point, they're
not quite as Siren
linguistically.
As the Siren.
There are commonalities in the base language, but even like the sounds are starting to change. They're starting to adopt new letters. They write differently.
They write.
Actually, the other Siren do too. This is one of the difference between them and the Celts. One of the things they adopt from the elves who come through are writing and writing in stone, which is actually different than the Bedrakim who write into wood. But what they do is their words are going to be different than in English. Words are blocks, and this is based off of actually the alphabet of the Mysteritas. They actually adopt it to something much, much simpler to understand because they're much shorter lived than the elves. And the Elven language is exceptionally complicated, and even the writing gets sort of localized. But it is actually an alphabetic language, even though if you look at it, much like if you looked at mine, you go, oh, that's hieroglyphics. They're not. It's actually an alphabetic language. Certain shapes mean certain things. And so there are cues that you can pick up from the Mayan language, which were simplified by the Syrian into their own language. But one of the things they do is they write top down in blocks, which sort of match up the way that the elves wrote, because that's where they learned how to do it from. And they thought it was kind of a good idea. So before that, they really have no written history, and then they start gaining one from that point on.
I'm just going to jump in here for a quick second and remind you of time and that we haven't changed anything yet.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Okay. So this is probably going to be a two-part episode.
It's probably going to be a two-part episode.
So we will now go into the next thing, which is shared symbolism.
Okay.
The big thing I have is blue is important, and I'm guessing stone has to be important.
You're going to go with blue of the sky, blue of the water. Like, why? There's got to be a reason why blue.
Yes, and I'm thinking
maybe
the water.
There's like a sky god or a water god.
Remember, their gods are different. Their gods are localized and varied.
Which is why I'm asking.
So, no, I think it's the blue of the water because especially after the massive invasion, that's what brings them protection is the blue.
Is the
I'm saying probably even maybe pre-Badrachum, no blue face paint.
Okay.
But post-Badrachum, blue face paint.
Okay.
And that's when they start doing that as it's a sign of defiance, and you can't screw with us because your horses don't go across water.
Blue clothing? If you're going to get into blue clothing,
probably not because of dyeing.
Well, that's what I was about to say. If you're going to get into blue clothing, now you got to get into dyeing, which means plant life and insects. So,
or seafood. I mean,
or seafood. Okay, fair enough.
The ocean does. Bring out some dyes.
Definitely.
I don't think dyeing's a huge thing there because they more prefer to blend into the background. They don't like to stand out because when you're out hunting from your village and other hunters bump into you, you don't necessarily want them to know you're there.
Okay, but blue being so important, you don't want to put some kind of blue aside to we're going to battle face paint. Maybe special occasions of blue cloth or
maybe the local chieftain.
Well, wait a minute. Even the blue face paint, you're still talking dye.
Oh, yes. They know how to make it.
Okay.
But the thing is, it's reserved for, I think I'll make that a color the chieftain wears as a significance of his station.
Okay.
And we will make blue face paint the sign of warriors going to war.
Okay.
Even though very quickly they start adapting more armor.
Something simple like, the chief gets blue across his forehead and warriors get blue across the cheek, something like that.
They probably have all kinds of different weird things going on.
That's what I'm
just
saying.
But I think the chief in the village has something blue.
Like clothing-wise?
Clothing-wise.
Okay.
To signify at all times. You can walk into a Syrian village, you see the guy who has blue. And I don't think it's a specific thing because they're very regionalized, but it might be a hat. It's probably some kind of scarf-ish or shirt thing that is blue, or maybe even just a gem that they found that's in a piece of jewelry that they make. Because metalworking is one of their skills, but I think the chiefs are allowed to do it outside of combat. But you're all equals when you go to war, even though you're doing what he's telling you to.
Fair enough. Okay. So, what about beliefs and cultural norms?
Okay, so one of the important things is I want them to be a lunar calendar people. So they don't care so much about the behavior of the sun. They care about the moons. And one of which is very hard to see because it is.
When you say moons, you don't mean the different moons that are going to show up in the days of the week. You mean you have multiple moons.
There are two moons.
There are two moons.
There are two moons. So there are cycles of moons that, with light. So you will have that progression, which is important, much like in any lunar Earth-based culture. There's a secondary moon which does not reflect light.
So how do you see it?
Because it will occasionally be between. It has a smaller
profile.
Well, it has a smaller orbit around the Earth. It's relatively small, but you can see it sort of move across the other moon.
Okay. So occasionally it'll make the other moon look like an eye because it's in front of it.
Something's in front of it. And I know those days have to be important to them because it helps hide the other moon. So those are probably their rating days.
Okay.
So that for them, that's an important evening, of power because there's extra power. That there's something religiously connected to that moon. I don't know what it is.
Yes, you do.
Not yet. I'm making this up at this point. Okay.
I know, but I don't know if you remember the conversation that we had about the guard, the undefined guard, just like the guard who you're going to throw a stone and get his attention. We had this whole conversation on a prior episode where I was like, no, all that stuff doesn't exist. And you're like, yes, it does exist. And I'm like, if you haven't made it up yet, or if I, as the world builder, haven't made it up yet, then it doesn't exist. So I'm saying right now, yes, it does exist according to you. You just haven't made it up yet.
Then I have to agree with you if you're using me as the logic.
I'm using you as the logic, even though I disagree.
How can I be without logic?
I disagree with it completely. Anyway.
Okay.
So lunar cycles are important. Little moon in front of the big moon means rating time, and there's a religious significance to it.
Yes.
Okay.
The sea brings life or protects life. Water in general is important, but especially the sea. The pools of water that you find, the still pools of water, the small ponds, anything water-based, but the sea is the big one. But it's good and bad because it can bring life or death. It can be good or bad life it brings because the evil heart-eating elves could come out, or it can protect you from the people on the horses. So,
just an idea I thought I'd throw up on the board there.
Wow, that's mean.
Does that not work?
Well, only when we get to the part where their souls get thrown at the volcano.
Okay,
but we're not there yet.
So, we're kind of talking about beliefs, and Jeff has a blank spot. He's got all these things written down on the board that we usually go off of the show, and under religion he had nothing, and I just filled it in with Scientology. So I thought that'd be funny. Yeah. The Scientology Siren.
All of the priests are called cruises. I take that back. I apologize in case there's any lawyers listening.
Any what?
Lawyers listening.
Lawyers listening. Oh, see, I wouldn't be so worried about the lawyers as I would be about the Thetans. So, okay, water-based.
So water's very important.
Water's very
Blood's very important.
Blood's very important.
Blood's always important.
Well, yeah, it's pretty much important to everybody.
Yeah, because that's always the big mojo getter. Most rituals have to happen at night because that's why they're lunar people.
Okay, so they're lunar, water, and bloody.
And night's when holy things happen.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of conversed in a lot of cultures.
Yeah.
But to them, the night brings you cover. The night is a safe time. It's when you sleep. So for them, night is holy. You perform your rituals then. If you perform rituals in the day, you need the blood to up the mojo to holy levels.
Okay.
So most Siren prefer not to do that, but,
Why not? Well, maybe it's important timing-wise. They're like, we don't have the time to wait for tomorrow.
But there was this great scene that played out in history when, I think it was Julius was invading Britain the first time. And he came with, Julius-style force into an area that was going to be overwhelmed. And they did a mass slaughter of, children.
Their own?
Yes.
Their own children.
Their own children because they were trying to create mojo to stop the Roman army, which worked because the Romans...
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the invading force slaughtered their own children. You're saying the defending force.
The Celts, led by the Druids, slaughtered a bunch of their own children to get enough mojo to stop the Romans, which in a way worked because, according to Julius, all their jaws, they're just like, what the heck is going on? And it really...
It messed with them.
It messed with the brains of a lot of the legionnaires. And if you don't remember, the Romans actually ended up pulling out because they didn't have enough forces to actually control the whole country. So they ended up pulling out of Britain ultimately. And they went back again later and reinvaded it. But Julius did not hold Britain. So, as he held Gaul. And, the original Druids were, and some people will argue this because they're like, no, they were not. The histories come down from the Romans because once again, no written words.
The winners get to write the history.
They're starting to find some archaeological evidence that kind of backs up that Druids, they would spill some blood.
Yeah.
And
I think we all have a role-playing game idea of what a druid is whenever someone says a druid.
And it's
not
nothing.
accurate, no.
Yeah.
It's not real-world accurate.
In some ways it was because they were sort of the druids were the law keepers, the judges of the area. Mm-hmm. So they were important, and they kind of traveled around. They weren't stationary, so there's some things, but most of it, we have a sort of a kumbaya feeling of what druids were, and evidence states that they're like any other Stone Age religion. Stone Age religions are bloody.
Yeah, they're
all of them, and to certain levels, not nearly as bad as others. But especially if you came from an area with a harsh climate, or the world screwed with you, usually the harsher and more bloody it was. Huzzah! So those are sort of the important things there for their cultural norms.
I mean, do we want to get into something that's
another thing
less
is
severe?
Fierce. They're most of it is not severe.
No. I finish your thought.
When we get to rituals.
Finish the thought you were just going to say. I didn't want to break you. You were talking about fierce something.
Fierce independence.
Okay.
It's like tribes are unto themselves important. Clans within tribes are important. So there's a fierce independence streak which never goes away.
Okay. What I was going to say is, did you want to get into something that's a little less severe, like food or
we're not to that part of the chart.
Okay. I was trying to transition, Jeff. That was called a segue. Maybe you've heard about it.
But you're not going in order.
Because we were just talking about religion.
No, we were talking about beliefs. And there are some rituals which will show up in the religion, but we were not really talking so much about the religion. The only religion we were really talking about was the Druids, which is not the same.
Oh, I know they weren't going to be Druid religion, but we were talking about how the night is holy and how...
I'm lying. Wait. I call them Druids. Ooh. That's my cheap cop out. I call the Syrian.
You call the Syrian Druids. Yeah. You're killing me.
I'm just screwing with you.
Are you lying right now? Because I think you might be lying right now.
No,
I
actually
call them something. They really are
Druids.
Okay,
but mine are more based in history Druids, not
role playing Druids.
Not role playing Druids, not Kumbaya, Disney Druids. Well, I think I'm going to cut it off because the other part is the more meaty part of the culture, and we're at over 40 minutes at this point.
Yeah, we might as well. So, does this mean 3 episodes? If we're going to get into more culture shit, I mean, we haven't changed anything, so we haven't.
Actually, we have because I'm making up half the scrap as I'm going along.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Yeah. Well, then good.
I'm just very good at doing.
Well,
this.
Then you should clarify that because here's my thing: when we do an episode like this, and this could even be part of, you don't have to cut this out either. So here's my thing: when we do something like this, obviously this was a good exercise for you to flesh out something. But
I'm not helping them.
But you're not helping them. Not that you're not a lot. I mean, most of what
for
you're
me,
talking
it's more
about
inspirational stuff,
which is fine. But what I think you need to do is, while you're having that inspiration, you need to talk about it a little mechanically so that the listener can then apply it to their process. Because I'm on the other side of the table, and I didn't know what you were being inspirational about or not. Yeah. And to me, it just sounded like you dictating a history.
Yes. And that part was true because the history's the history, and that part's not changed.
I wrote down all this stuff over here, and I know you made some of this stuff as we went along.
Yes. The last 3 things are all made up.
Just those? There's not anything else that we talked about?
A lot of the stuff I said there is made up, yes.
Okay. Well, that's my point.
If it's not listed up there, I just made it up. Or it's been going through my head as things I've been thinking about.
Do you hear what I'm saying, though? As far as making this process helpful to the listener.
And I'm going to go over a bit of why I did it, one in the order I did it.
Okay.
And there's a couple things you can flip around the order, and it depends on what works for you. If you don't have a stagnant history, the thing is, I'm trying to evolve it, not just have it exist. So there's 2 basic things I need to do. What are their core beliefs, and what is their shared experience? Those 2 things will pull out what are the important symbols to them.
Oh yeah, that'll put a lot of the other stuff in
and when you get into the language and the religion and the common food and drink, that's all dictated by those other 2 things. So the reason I like to spend time on beliefs and the shared experience, or aka history. And it might not all be history, but it pretty much is. It really is history, actually. I don't know why it's called history, but is to me that's the foundation. And so I look at the beliefs and I say, what are the experiences? Would one of the experiences we talked about change their beliefs? And since we did the experience first, we kind of added some beliefs in that, like the whole thing with the sea brings life and protects life. But it also some of the life it brings can be bad, so you can't trust it because it brought the elves who eat hearts, and it, blocked
can't
the
trust
Bedragum.
The sea?
Life is not good or evil. It can be either.
Okay.
But it brings life and protects life.
Okay.
And some of the life it brings can kill you.
So why don't, instead we write sea can't be trusted? Maybe that's how they interpret it.
Okay.
But really, life can't be trusted.
Yes. Well, that's that is probably where it goes to. And that probably leads to the fierce independence streak that they have.
Do you want to tie this in a bow until the next episode?
Well, I thought our little discussion there was kind of tying in the bow. What specifically do you mean by that?
Well, I didn't know if there was any other thing you want to cover. What I think that the listener, if they're going to create or modify an existing culture, having this list would be good. So maybe you'll put it in the show notes.
Well, I'll put a link to the episode for culture in the show notes,
but
which is where that list comes from.
Just quick verbally, I'm gonna say, start with shared experience and beliefs and cultural norms. Mm-hmm. From there, go to the shared symbolism, I think.
The shared symbolism is one of those, for me, I kind of fill out as I go.
Okay.
Because I'm like, that's a cool symbol I want them to retain.
Okay. But my point is, as far as like the foundation of the list and subsequently the process.
The reason I put it second is I might come up with shared symbols based off of when I do the shared experience.
Fair enough. And then we've got language, religion, common food, drink, and rituals. Mm-hmm. Then art, music, clothing.
Yeah.
Okay. For a second, I thought it said press.
And so I really do these in order. And sometimes I'll come up with ideas a little out of order, but I try and think of them because all these things start to layer on each other as you go in. Your language dictates, you come up with words for things that are important to you. Mm-hmm. That's based off of your norms. Religion, beliefs, and norms, that gets very merged together. But when I say religion there, I mean more the specifics, like are they polytheistic? Are they monotheistic? And I'll try and find there's a very cool website that you can generate really kind of complex cultures very quickly if you don't have any idea of one. And I'll have to see if I can find that to share that in that episode.
I also want to throw something. When you're considering shared experience, I think the most important thing when you're creating a culture from the beginning in a story is their, like physically, where are they? Like that's going to be,
and to me, geography is part of it, and that's why we talked about
right. That but as you're starting it, that seems to be the most important thing because you're not going to have.
You're right.
You're not going to have a nomadic group of people that live on a small island,
or they'll be very, very bored.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to have a group of desert dwelling style people if they live in the mountains.
And that is a very fair thing that I did talk about in this episode. But is 100%, 130% true is where they live, what resources are there, or resources that they want or need that are not there are going to have the largest impact. It's like if I run out of farming land, I can come up with reasons why it's good to go raiding England. Because that's ultimately what the Vikings wanted was farming land. And the English just happened to live on their farming land. So geography is ultimately, and that's the reason why, like, if you look at the first 50 episodes, I go into physical geography first, is the foundation, and then the history they have with that geography. Like the Siren pretty much lived there most of their existence. Other ones spent much more time as nomads and kind of came in later. But, I mean, their whole life has been more settled, more tight-knit communities than some of the other cultures in the world. And that's kind of what leads to some of the shared experience. Now, obviously you can change it. Maybe in your world, the settled people whoop the butts of the invaders. In my world, I have them lose.
Or at least
because the culture's better developed, so I had to get rid of them.
Mm-hmm. So then, shall we close it down? Do you want to get more into this on the next episode? So is this part 1?
Yeah, this is part 1.
Okay, so there'll be a part 2. What's the world builder task for the day?
Is look at a secondary culture of yours. Most people have pretty good developed cultures, the ones that they, are central to their characters and story. But they're the ones that are around there that maybe they only exist in name, or maybe you do have a bit of a culture built up to them. Kind of look at them and kind of go through this process. And I know as a world builder like me, you kind of have these vague things in your mind, but you haven't really thought them through.
Or you haven't written them down.
Go through the process of working some of that.
Yeah, flesh them out a little bit.
At least the first 4 parts.
Right. And this is definitely coming from an architect style.
Yes.
Yeah.
Episode 13 is the cultures episode, the one where I go over the abstract of how I build the culture. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, too.
And put a link to the world builder type episode, because I feel like we've made a lot of references to that episode.
Oh, just as a reference back.
Just as a great reference. Okay. When we get to talking about gunslinger, architect, and gardener. And I just think that if they don't know that term, because we've used it a lot in the past few episodes, and I think
I'll put a link to that too.
I think it's a great episode to listen to. I think as a world builder, it's a good one to help you understand who you are, what you do, why you do it, and where to go next.
And where I lean heavily towards architect, that doesn't make it right for you. That's an important thing. Some people work better, and it's funny. And I was talking this with one of my friends.
I mean, you while this was an architect exercise, you were gunslinger the whole episode.
Well, it's funny because I definitely have I like to say I use agile tools in my architect, because the thing is I have a lot of ideas in my head, and it's getting them out and thinking about them and going, does that make sense? In the next episode, we're going to go over the last 4 elements. So you can cheat and go ahead and have those done, and then you can taunt us on Twitter or taunt me on Twitter.
You can keep going. This is just an idea.
Okay.
I'm writing down.
All right. And then for the real world task of the day, support your loved ones. We're getting very close to the second major flourish of holidays near the end of the year now. Make sure to support your loved ones, and however that or shows whatever that means in your family. Maybe you're going to parties. Maybe you're having parties. Maybe you and your loved one are hosting parties. Whatever that is, support your loved ones. A lot of people can get overstressed this time of year. But ultimately, you got to take care of the people you love, whether they're family, whether they're friends, whether they're both, whether you happen to love strangers appropriately.
While we're talking about the holidays, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you can get most of your holiday shopping done on Amazon. And what you should do is go to www.gardool.com/Amazon. It'll just take you to Amazon, and it'll help the show. It won't change your prices for better or worse. It'll just give, the World Builder a kickback, and that'll help keep the lights on, and we can keep bringing you great quality material like this.
Excellent. What a brilliant idea.
What are we going to do next time?
We're going to once again skip the T's.
Right.
And we're going to add another T's and do part 2, where we're going to do language, very briefly because we touched on it a bit, religion, common food, drink rituals, arts, music, and dress. And then I'm going to go over how I logic check stuff.
Okay. And basically, take some notes on this, because it's probably going to be a similar process that we just went through.
Yes.
And the creation is going to come in the conversation. We're not really pointing out exactly when the lightning strikes, but lightning is happening in Jeff's head. So
yes, lightning is always striking my head, is what I've been told. And as always, make sure to go to gardool.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to, and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardool.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.